All right, we're less than a month away from the draft. Let's take a look at the state of the Texans offense and the position that I'm not sure they can avoid on draft day. It is the locker room, number one source for Texans daily digital content. I'm Landry Locker. You can hear me Monday through Friday, 10 to 2 on Sports Radio 610 and the Odyssey app. So I'm looking at this offense, and we assume the Texans are going to draft a quarterback. So most likely it's going to be a rookie quarterback. And if it's not a rookie quarterback, it's going to be a quarterback with limitations. And someone like Davis Mills or Case Keenum. I don't even want to fathom that. But the point is, you're going to have to put the quarterback all the time in good position to succeed, but especially with a rookie quarterback and potentially the guys that you have on the Texans roster, it's going to be specifically important. So let's just go through the positions and how we feel, or at least how I feel, I should say, about each of these positions and the things that are important for a quarterback to succeed at the NFL level. You look at the offensive line, very solid. Offensive line has been a popular talking point around here for a while. You got one of the best left tackles in football, the highest paid in Laramie Tunsil, 2 times, which he wants to make clear. You have Titus Howard, who had a good year last year. If he can build on that, you got bookend tackles. You just brought in Shaq Mason, who's an upgrade from what you had last year. Very good run blocker. And then you do have two pretty big question marks in Kenyon Green at left guard in the current state of the center position. But I fully, assuming that they're going to address the center position, you have a solid offensive line for a rookie quarterback. But they do got to address the center position, which they will. Running back, you have Dameon Pierce, who was on track to rushing for 1,000 yards last year. Still don't know if Dameon Pierce is a guy that you hand the rock to 20 times every game and count on that being able to happen over the course of an entire season. Didn't really have an opportunity to do that at Florida. Might be Dan Mullen's fault last year. I don't want to say he wore down, but he got hurt at the end. He needs help. And you brought in Singletary to help him out. So from the running back position, as of right now, and I could see a piece or two being added to that room because Nick Caserio and D'Amico Ryans have a history of evaluating the running back position. You feel solid at running back. So offensive line, check. Running back, check. Tight end, Dalton Schultz, one of the 5 best receiving tight ends of the last 3 years. Best tight end that you've had since Owen Daniels. It's not even a hot take. It says as much about the state of the Texans tight end position post Owen than anything. But Dalton Schultz, 1 year, $9 million contract, solid. Tegan Quintariano, you feel good about him. I call him QT. You feel good about him. He showed some things. Looked like he could maybe be a solid reserve tight end, or maybe the ceiling's high enough to where he could be a really good 1B backup to Schultz. And then you brought in Andrew Beck, who's going to do a lot of small things. You're going to move him around. He's going to line up a lot at fullback, might line up in 2-3 tight end sets. But you're pretty solid at the tight end position. You have guys that can do pretty much everything you need to do from receiving, blocking, etc. So O-line, check. Running back, check. Tight end, check. And you're going to add some pieces in the draft to maybe some of those spots, some more than others. But you feel decent about that. Now we get to the wide receivers. Whew. You just traded Brandon Cooks. You can make a case that you didn't get a lot from Brandon Cooks last year until you didn't want to, and he cost you the number 1 pick. But you have Robert Woods, who, God bless him, I think this was a very, very good signing. He knows the system. He would have been second on your team last year in most receiving categories, despite coming off a torn ACL and playing in Tennessee with limited quarterback play. You have Woods. You have Noah Brown, who was the Cowboys' probably 4th best receiver, ideally, assuming that Michael Gallup didn't get hurt. 4th best receiver, and I'll put Schultz in there as well. Can do a lot of things, but probably a number 3, 4 receiver, whatever. Hell, he doesn't even belong in the league if you listen to some of the Cowboys fans. But you got Noah Brown, you got Robert Woods, you got Nico Collins, year 3. Saw some decent things from Nico last year, but he's been unable to stay healthy the last couple of years. Consistency's been in question. And even when you were laying out like the best case scenario for Nico last year, I think most people thought ultimate optimistic outlook of Nico, a good number 2 receiver, which is realistic to expect based on where he was drafted. And then you have John Mechie, second round pick a couple of years ago. I don't know what to expect from John Mechie. I don't want to lay out expectations for John Mechie. I've said this 100 times. If you listen to this channel, you've heard me say this. If John Mechie goes out there at camp or at mini camp and he's simply touching his toes and stretching, it's been successful because he went through leukemia like he did. And even with that, last year when Mechie was selected, there was some talk about, is this the best option at wide receiver? There were some guys saying maybe you should take Pickens. Man, there were some guys who thought Sky Moore would have been a better slot option than Mechie. We don't know what Mechie's going to be. A lot of potential to be a good slot guy. I'm expecting there to be some growing pains no matter what for a rookie coming into the league. And you factor in that he hasn't played ball in a while, coming off the torn ACL a while ago and the leukemia. I just don't have I don't want to set up unrealistic expectations for Mechie. I think he could end up being a contributor, but I'm not going to place too much on John Mechie. And I don't think Mechie should stop you from getting someone like a Jackson Smith and Jigba, Zay Flowers, whatever, someone else that can do some slot things. And if you have multiple guys that can work in the slot, I don't think you should prevent you from doing that. And then you have Amari Rodgers and some other guys on the back end of the depth chart. I say all that to ask this question. Can the Texans really afford to not draft a wide receiver in this draft? D'Amico Ryan spoke earlier this week. He talked about Dalton Schultz being kind of a vertical threat for this team. If you're relying on Dalton Schultz to be a guy that's going to extend the field, with all due respect, that's a recipe for not a lot of explosiveness on offense. I like what a lot of these guys can do. I like what Robert Woods can bring to the table. I like what Noah Brown can bring to the table. I like when Nico Collins is healthy. I love his work ethic. I love his drive. I like what John Mechie could potentially bring to the table. The Cowboys last year, they had Dalton Schultz. They had Michael Gallup at the end of the season. They had CeeDee Lamb, and even they needed more speed. Like even they, if you talk to people out there, I talked to Brian Broaddus, who works at 105.3 The Fan. They needed speed. They needed playmakers, and they had Dalton Schultz with CeeDee Lamb, with Michael Gallup, and they still needed some speed. So when you factor in that the Cowboys last season, thought that they didn't have enough explosiveness, and you're taking Dalton Schultz and you're taking Noah Brown and you're putting them around guys that aren't as talented as the Cowboys were last year, at least before the draft, can you really afford to put a rookie quarterback or a veteran quarterback in position to where you don't have guys with a little bit more upside? We look at San Francisco, you look at what they do, you look at the guys that they got that make their explosive plays. They got Christian McCaffrey. They got Deebo Samuel in the run game and receiving game. They got Brandon Ayuk, who many feel is one of the more underrated receivers in the NFL. And then they got a guy in Jennings who can do the dirty work. Number 15, if you're not familiar with names, you just watch the 49ers a lot and wonder who that guy is out there blocking and making occasional big plays. I feel like the Texans have a lot of Jennings here. They have a lot of guys who can do the dirty work, that can block, that can move the chains, but they need some explosion. They need someone who you look at and say, this guy could potentially be a number one receiver. I'm not saying these guys can't be better, but outside of Mechie and Collins, the arrow's not pointing up with a lot of the guys in this receiving core. So wide receiver, You feel good about a lot of things on this offense. Wide receiver is probably the one position the Texans cannot ignore in this draft. What say you? Comment, subscribe, like, follow along. No matter what happens, whether they draft a receiver or not, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in this together. Happy effing less than a month away from the